Hi. So, Malazan Book of the Fallen is my favorite fantasy series of all time. I find it endlessly fascinating. It has everything a good, nice, big, epic fantasy story should have. It has a buttload of characters, really interesting magic, lore and backstory, super detailed prose, philosophical themes explored throughout, super amazing one-on-one fights and military fights. It simply has it all. And I think Erickson, the author Stephen Erickson, kind of threw everything at the project. It really feels like a series where he thought, let's just take all the things I like and put it in the series. Every word and sentence feel deliberate. You can read the series multiple times and get something new from it every time. It's intentionally written very layered, meaning that each sentence means, of course, what it is on the surface, but deep down it has multiple meanings. And this has garnered Malazan a bit of a reputation for being maybe a little bit overly dense, long. This video is more about all the misconception there is around Malazan Book of the Fallen. To battle all these misconceptions, I have gone on the internet, onto forums and Reddit, and I even asked ChatGPT about misconceptions of Malazan, and I've boiled it down to 5 points. I'm going to address one at a time to see if it holds up or if it's not. The first misconception is that it's hard to understand, and I think it's worth mentioning that Malazan is more than just the 10 books in the main series. It also consists of a lot of other spin-off books written by Ian Esselmont. And Stephen Erickson and Esselmont actually gamed the series in a kind of Dungeons and Dragons type role-playing game. So there's a lot of previous backstory. So that's why some of the characters seems very strong compared to other characters. It's simply because in the game, they're overpowered, overleveled compared to the other characters, right? An example of this could be Alamander Rake or Dasim Ultor, who are both very strong. I presume Kaladin Brute too. When they say Malazan is hard to understand, they often talk about the beginning. I'm going to talk about the prose a little bit later. The start of the book, the first book, Guardians of the Moon, drops us, the reader, into a battle directly after the prologue. We're at a village, a city called Pale, and something's happening. There's this big empire. There's something called Moonspawn with the Prince of Darkness on it. That is not Ozzy Osbourne. And it's just very confusing. A comparison I often make about this particular scene is, imagine Lord of the Rings started at the Battle of Helm's Deep. You didn't have any of the other books, it just started there, right? That's the way the story starts. Then you would be confused. You'd be, who's Aragorn? Why does the dwarf and the elf compare kill counts? What's an orc? Why are there two hobbits talking to a tree? What are even hobbits? And then Gandalf appears and saves the day, and who is Gandalf? What is this? Where did he even come from, right? Who's the very thin guy who's leading those two other hobbits, right? It would be very confusing because you didn't have the established knowledge. Normally, we are used to, in fantasy, that book one starts the story. And while there is backstory in fantasy novels, book one is usually where the story starts. But not in Malazan, because in Malazan, the story has already started long ago in a game, right? So see Guardians of the Moon as basically just your entry point. You kind of take the little guy and drop directly into the action. And that's where you start. And sure, it can be very confusing to be introduced to so many characters at once, and the action and the magic and the, what's going on? Who's Alamander Rake? What even is Moonspawn? Who is the Malazan Empire? And why are they here? Why do they want Pale of all the things? And then after the siege, the story kind of begins. It's very hard at the beginning to figure out who's important and who's not. There are so many characters coming at you. With Malazan, it's important to just keep reading. This brings us to misconception number 2. There are simply too many characters to keep track of. And I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of characters in this series. I mean, a lot. a lot. And some of them even share names, and it's very confusing. But I think most important characters you will learn quickly. The story starts with a young guy named Perrin, and instantly you would think, he's the main character. He must be. He's where the story starts. Well, no, he's simply not. There is no main character in Malazan Book of the Fallen. There's no Frodo going to destroy the One Ring, no Lannister family to follow. I'm not gonna lie, when I read the story, there are so many characters I don't remember. There's so many soldiers. It's a military fantasy after all, right? So there's so many soldiers, and they all get names, and they get like one scene, and then 6 books later, it's like, oh, you remember this guy? He's the one with the one line in book 1. I'm like, I don't remember this guy at all. What are you even talking about? Why is it important, and why is he here? And then it turns out he was very important. I was like, probably should have paid more attention. But again, that just rewards a reread. If you have the time for that, which I don't. Characters are super annoying in this series. And by that I mean, they keep their cards very close to the chest. And some characters lie, some characters distort the truth. You experience something in like book 1, and it will shape how you see a certain character. And then 5 books later, you would find out, oh, that was actually a mistake. That was not how events actually unfolded. So you do not have to be mad at this character at all. I'm like, I guess I shouldn't have been mad this whole time. Because Malazan is really about questioning the narrative. Malazan it's a military story, but it's also about history. And it's kind of written as history. That's why it's called the Book of the Fallen. It's a book, historical telling of the Fallen in the Malazan Empire. And I think Steven Erikson makes a point that you can't really trust those who write history. They say history is written by the winners of a war, but the question is, how accurate is that retelling? And since, there's a winner, they can just lie. Another thing that's super annoying for some, but I find very fascinating, is there's no plot armor on this. All right, there are characters who you think is so important. There's one particular I'm thinking of that is described as being very important for the plot and the whole story as a whole, and then the second they're introduced, they're killed off, and you think, I guess we do something else now. This is also the biggest problem, or the biggest thing that annoys most people, is that you get attached to the characters. Like in the book 1 is Whiskey Jack, or Lauren, or maybe even Kalam, Quickben, Perrin, you name it, right? Fiddler, right? All the soldiers. And then in book 2, the story's on another continent, and it's 99% new cast. You still have the core group, like some recurring characters from the first book that carries over, but as a whole, it's a new story, right? And then you find new characters to love, like Mappo and Ikaria, or Coltan, and you think, I want to see what are they up to? Where are those stories going? And then in book 3, we're on another continent. We're back to the previous group, right? And there's new stuff. Like now it's Whiskey Jack again, and then Amanda Rake or whatever, right? And then book 4, it's completely new characters. And I'm like, but I just wanna read about the characters I like. What are these constant moving around? Not even like what's going over there. It's a different continent, man. It's so far removed from where we're even at. And this can be very frustrating. And that's the hardest thing to do in Malazan. That is to not get furious at this thing. The books are so long, which I will talk about a little bit later. So the frustration of knowing that you have to read 1,200-page book to just get back to know what Fiddler's doing, or Kalam, or whoever it is you like, right? It's very, very frustrating. There's also a bit of a strange structure, since like book 5 takes place before book 1, but it's on a different continent. So it can definitely be the most annoying thing about the series. Going back, reflecting on it as I've finished it all, I think knowing what happens at the end, knowing the storyline, knowing what ends up happening to the characters, really enhance it in a way. Like the second book, I didn't care much for the first time, but upon like thinking about it constantly, I think it's actually really, really, really solid. That being said, the book that I thought was the most annoying was Reba's Gale, because it was the seventh book and it's very close to the end and it's a new freaking cast of characters and I just couldn't take it. And I think it's long and I don't think it ends well. I'm not really a fan of Reba's Gale. So the misconception is pretty much there are too many characters to keep track of, and that's true. But I think the main, like Perrin, Tavora, Coltan, Cotillion, Shadowthrone, if you can call them main characters. Again, there's so many characters, right? The Sengar brothers, Udinas. I'm just rattling off names, right? They're all important to the plot, and you're not gonna forget the main players, right? And but the beauty about Malazan is, with all these characters, you'd think it's hard to invest emotionally in the characters, but I found that I actually was very invested in a lot of the characters, like a lot of them. And since there's so many of them, there's a lot to love, and I really cared about what happened to them. Some of them, the main guy, and even those who were just there for like one book and then they went on and did something else, or they die. A lot of characters die. As I said, there's no plot armor, which is interesting. It makes it fun to read, but it also makes you appreciate the characters a little bit more. So even though there's so many characters and it's impossible to keep track of them all, I actually find that the emotional payoff for most of the characters, at least those I remember, was very, very satisfying. That being said, there's this freaking guy, right? There's this guy, his name is Leoman, right? And he's like, I don't even remember which book it was, but he is built up to be this guy. The rebellion has been crushed. He's gonna pick up the pieces and fight the thing. And then halfway through the book, he walks through a portal and he's not in the freaking series at all, right? This might be a spoiler, but I don't care. This guy just left, he just bounced, right? And that's the kind of thing you can expect. You have no idea which characters are gonna stick around or die or just bounce and be like, I'm out of here, right? The third misconception is there's no real hand-holding, right? Steven Erikson doesn't tell you anything outright. I think we as fantasy readers have become so accustomed to having everything explained to us, having everything told. Like, what are warrants are kind of the magic system in Malazan, and it's not really clear how they work. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not quite sure how they work, but it's fun, right? There was a time in fantasy where magic had to be understood and explained, and I thought that was horrible, personally. But Malazan is just a series where you have to get on its level. It's not gonna go down to you, right? Erikson gives you little breadcrumbs that you can follow and explore and think about and chew on. Little themes here and there. And when again, the whole series is recontextualized once you finished it, right? I've not reread the series, but if I would, I think I would get a lot more out of it. So Erikson doesn't explain anything really, but he will explain stuff at some points, right? And I'm not gonna lie, maybe if you really read deeply and think, you can kind of figure more out than you give yourself credit for. If you think about, there are gods, there are elder gods, and then there are ascendants. I wonder what that is. It's not really explained, but could you not figure it out just by reading the text? I think you could. So you have to do a lot of stuff yourself, a lot of pondering, a lot of theory crafting, so to speak, but it's endlessly rewarding. And sometimes you'll just be wrong. Sometimes you think, I thought this character was this, but he's not. Or I thought this was how it works, but it wasn't. But at some point it will come, right? A good example could be the character of Quickben, right? Quickben is this, in the beginning he's just a squad mage, but he's obviously, there's so much more to him than meets the eye, obviously, right? And then towards the end of book 1, now book 2, maybe even book 3, I think it's book 2, you kind of learn his backstory. You're like, it only took us 2,000 pages to realize what he was all about. I guess that's what we do. As Steven Erikson questions narrative, both historically, what I said about who's writing history, the winners, can you trust the narrative that's being conveyed through history, and can you trust the characters in the story? Because as I said before, the characters are not often sure what they see. They're not reliable. Some are not reliable because they're just, crazy or manipulative. But some are not reliable because we are not reliable. Humans are not reliable. We interpret everything through our own biases and emotions. And so does the characters. And that crashes with the objective reality. Steven Erikson just doesn't show you Malazan as objective in that sense. It's always filtered through characters. And that clashes with other characters' interpretation of events. And, the whole thing spins on. The greater point is, you can't trust anybody. And not in this book either. Now for the fourth misconception, and that is the prose are hard to understand. If you haven't read the book, I can see why you would say this. And even if you have read the book, I can see why you would say this. As I said in the intro, they're very dense and they're very layered. And as an inspiring writer, they often frighten me because I sure as hell can't write that good. But they are very layered, they are very deep, and they are very heavy, especially the dialogue scenes. You'll have a lot of characters talk in very, very deep conversation, like they're philosophers. And you'd have whole pages of people just arguing the merits of capitalism, essentially, or the meaning of death, or how to find meaning in a world that is void of anything good. The last thing or how to deal with sadness and pain. But Erikson's prose are actually not that bad. They're still in English and they're still understandable. It's not really a problem of linguistic understanding. It's not vagueness. It's just everything means more than you know, right? So the prose convey backstory and feel and themes that you do not comprehend because you don't know where the story ends up, right? So once you know that, once you go back to it, again, you don't have to reread it, but it's not really a problem of knowing, right? You can still read the words, and the words are not that incomprehensible. It's like, oh, then he thought this high hound of shadow. I was like, okay, what's a high hound of shadow? Like, you don't know that, but it's a big ass dog, right? From the shadow realm, so to speak. So yeah, the prose are very difficult to understand, but not because of the language, more so because of the use of the language. The fifth one, which I thought was fun, is the books they're too long. They're too long, man. They're too long. And, it's not really a misconception. They are very, very long. And again, it can be very frustrating if you've already loving characters and you have to wait a whole 1,300 books to return to those. I can totally see that. But as you go through them, don't miss the characters you like. Instead, go with the flow. When you're on a new continent with a new cast of characters, really try and figure out what are they up to. And try to open your mind for them too. Because if you do so, this series will become endlessly rewarding. So, those are some misconceptions as worries that people might have about Malazan Book of the Fallen. And the truth is, it's not really so difficult. It's just because it takes a lot of practice, patience, focus, and attention. It's really, really difficult to not, wanting to rush through and, figure out what's going on, right? But you just have to trust in the process that all will be revealed to you. And Steven Erikson knows what he's doing. He is a masterful storyteller. And for my money, he's the greatest living fantasy author. There's no going around. It takes commitment. I think I took 3 years finishing it all. You can take breaks from each book. You don't have to just go through them. But, you know what they say, right? The harder the climb, the better the reward. So, just keep at it. Bye.